There's I wondered if this holds any credence with you. There's a sort of a theory also that, to some extent, the character of Helena in All's Well, who also is someone of somewhat inferior social status, hopelessly in love with an aristocrat. If Shakespeare was putting anything of himself into that.
Well, no, you see, this is the point. I'm sure that in the plays, Shakespeare put himself into everybody, but is nowhere to be found.
Yes.
Whereas what's fantastically interesting about the sonnets is that maybe that is just distilled Shakespeare, essence of Shakespeare, you know?
Of course.
Or even though there are within the sonnets certain conventional postures adopted, like of the poet to his patron.
Right.
That's a very conventional relationship in sonnet sequences right from Petrarch onwards.
Right.
So it's not just pure unadulterated autobiography. There's definitely a convention at work there. Even the most thrilling thing, in a way, about the sonnets is the way they promise immortality to the young man is absolutely a convention of Elizabethan poetry. But as somebody rather wittily pointed out, it's just that all the others have disappeared completely. Shakespeare was the only one who was right, the only one whose promise that these poems would be remembered has been fulfilled.
It's ironic that while the poems are remembered, the young man hasn't really achieved immortality, because we're still arguing about who he was.
Okay, but then we're still arguing about the playwright.
Indeed. Now, when you received that manuscript all those years ago, was that, obviously you knew the sonnets, but was that the first time that you really got interested in them?
I didn't know the sonnets.
Yeah.
I really didn't. I was like everybody else, really. Somebody had given me a copy of the sonnets. I started reading. I gave up. It was too hard. I couldn't connect anything to anything else. And then you start cherry picking, and you come up with little plums of delight. But you can't. They just are cryptic. They're baffling. They're enigmatic.
Yes.
So I didn't really know, and it was only when I read John's version. And actually, to tell you the truth, the first time I'd ever read the sonnets all the way through was in John's version. So, in a sense, to me, John's version is the only version I know.
Oh, I see. So, now, do you have is there a favourite in all of those sonnets? Is there one that particularly resonates?
I particularly love one that is in our show, which is "Thy bosom is endeared with all hearts, which I by lacking have supposed dead," where he says to the young man, the wonderful thing about the love I feel for you is that all the people I've lost are somehow contained in you. And I've lost a lot of friends in my life, and I feel very moved by that notion that they aren't dead at all. They're living. He says, "Thou art the grave where buried love doth live," which is just an extraordinary. He says, "Their images I loved, I view in thee, and thou, all they, art all the all of me." It's a fantastically all-embracing idea, wonderful, and made very vivid. He says, when he says, "Without the grave where buried love doth live," he then says, "hung with the trophies of my lovers gone." The way in which he transforms the young man into this kind of cave, this great mausoleum, where all his beloved still live. It's very beautiful.
There's obviously in the show, there's a progression becomes apparent in the sonnets, from starting out with poems written as a commission, moving into poems that then begin to have Shakespeare's emotion in them, deep love of some kind for this young man, then a bitterness, and eventually friendship, and eventually the thoughts of mortality and immortality. How has your own attitude to this material changed over the many years you've been thinking about it? And
I think when I first did these poems, it was all about my being moved by them. The language above all, but also the ideas. Now, I'm much more concerned with the meaning of them and the progression through them, and the progression of images through them. In that sense, I think of them much more as being like music now. And before, I thought of them as just molten emotion.
Well, so it's not necessarily a sexual love that Shakespeare feels for the young man, but it is very passionate. I mean, what is your take on that? Do you think that Shakespeare was like bisexual, or was it just one of those very kind of platonic admiration things?
Well, a friend of mine who's indeed a Shakespeare scholar says Shakespeare had a bisexual imagination, which I think is a wonderful way of putting it.
Okay.
What actually happened between the sheets, I have no idea with William Shakespeare, none at all, although I'm absolutely certain that the poems to the young man are non-sexual, just as the poems to the woman are absolutely sexual.
Okay.
But I don't mean to say there wasn't some other person that he might have had sex with, but with that young man, I don't think there was a sexual element. But it's more than that. It's more overwhelming than that. It's something, I think maybe many people can relate to this. It's when a person of huge power for you invades your soul, enters deep into you, and overtakes you, and you begin to lose any sense of yourself because you're so overwhelmed by this person. Sometimes, for example, that could be a soldier inspired by his commander. It's been known, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
Or a student inspired by a teacher, or an apprentice inspired by the painter to whom he is apprentice. It could be all sorts of things. It's all about the complete invasion of the self by another.
Here's so the Dark Lady is obviously in this theory is a real person.
Yeah.
You don't, if I recall, venture any hypothesis about who she was.
Not at all. Nor does John, really. He just says, no, she was a woman that Shakespeare was involved in a very, very passionate, complex sexual relationship with. That's all he says. We don't know anymore. But various people. There was a famous English scholar called A.L. Rouse who was obsessed. He knew who the Dark Lady was. Absolutely wrote a whole biography of this woman as the Dark Lady. But to me, it's sort of credible, but equally there's nothing. It's curious. We know nothing about her,
yes,
except their relationship. Whereas with the young man, we know all sorts of other things about his wealth and about his status and all the rest of it.
Well, listen, there are more questions that I haven't been able to get to, and I have questions of my own. We are out of time. I'm so sorry about that. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Next week, same time, 6:30, we are talking about Caesar and Cleopatra. We have Diane Dacola and Nikki M. James. In the meantime, Simon Callow, many thanks for taking the time to do this. It's been a pleasure. Congratulations on the show.
Thank you so much.
And everyone out there, please go and see There Reigns Love, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Thank you. Goodbye.